Welcome to Rewatch-and-Rank. On this channel, we rewatch older TV shows, provide a summary and opinion on the episode before ranking each episode against each other. And today's episode is Bleach, the Bount Arc, episode 74, Memories of an Eternally Living Clan. Episode in a nutshell is a brief reminder of what happened in the episode. So after the battle in the last episode, Ishida walked away from everybody and he ended up collapsing. And this is when Yoshino, the rogue Bount, comes and finds him again, takes him back to the place that she is staying, and there she, throughout the episode, tells him how her greatest wish is to be able to die because the price of living forever is that she doesn't get an eternal afterlife. And one of her wishes was that she could die a human death and get that, land eternal or soul society, really, that she could go there with her soul. But when Bount die, they turn to ashes. And I guess, at least her theory is that they don't end up going to soul society, so they just become nothing. And she tells of how, when she first became a Bount, she started the same age as people, then slowly everybody else changed and aged and went through their lives. She didn't. She was driven out of town as potentially a witch, and just as she was starting to lose all hope and had considered to take her own life, that is when Jin appeared, and he basically gave her hope, and she was blinded by that hope and in love with him. And then one day she sees him kill a living human, which was against their code for living, and that betrayal is what woke up her humanity again, but it also made her fall out of love with him. And as much as she can never forgive him for his manipulations and for what he became, she also can't forgive herself for not being able to stop him. Then we, parallel to that, have Jin having a meeting with a bunch of other Bount that he's gathered. Apparently, by getting the Quincy, he's going to be able to give them power enough, or rather himself power enough, to pretty much become like a god and gain absolute power. And he wants to usher in the Bount era of history and no longer live in the shadows of history. And it is also revealed in these meetings that he actually has a Shinigami following him, which is Ichinose Maki that we kind of saw at the last episode, kind of in profile type thing. And we get Ichinose Maki, who was actually once part of Squad 11, and then when Kenpachi dueled the previous squad captain in order to become captain himself, he killed the other captain, became the captain. Ichinose decided the only captain he wanted to follow was the previous one, and so he abandoned Squad 11, and they're all surprised that he's managed to live in the human world for so long, and they realize that somebody must be keeping him alive. But they do hold a meeting, Squad 11, to figure out what they might want to do about Ichinose if they're going to do anything at all. And so, while all of that is happening, the very last thing that kind of happens is we do see a scene of Ichigo on the streets trying to find Ishida and failing to. But that's everything that happened in this episode. And now that we've been reminded about what happened in the episode, it is time to rank the episode. First on the mostly objective ranking, followed by the personal ranking. So, starting off, we have our single arc supporting character development. We learned that Ichinose Maki, or Maki Ichinose, was once a part of Squad 11. And then Kenpachi, in order to become the captain of Squad 11, had to challenge the existing captain and win in a duel. This duel resulted in the death of the former captain, who Maki greatly respected. And Kenpachi, of course, then became the new captain, and Maki couldn't really accept that because the only captain he wanted to follow was the previous one, and so he ends up leaving the squad and leaving Soul Society, and was assumed dead, because, well, We didn't really learn this previously in any of the other arcs, but it's heavily implied that the reason they thought he was dead is that he wasn't going to be able to survive in the human world, because they mention that somebody must be keeping him alive. And that could just be a mistranslation because I do watch subtitled. Um, or it's new lore, I don't know, and for that reason I didn't give any points for it, but they assume someone must be keeping him alive because I guess they did not think that he could survive outside of Soul Society on his own, and are surprised to discover that he is alive. And then we have the single arc main character development, which is worth 2 points, and this has to do with Yoshino and Jin and flashbacks from their history. So, as I mentioned in the summary, basically, Yoshino had struggled with becoming a Bount, wanted to be able to die and grow old like everybody else, found that, the fact that she couldn't change and was unchanging was unbearable when everyone around her changed, and even like the places she once knew started to crumble and become ruins, and it got to the point where she tried to take her own life. However, Jin stopped her. She fell in love with him, they had a romantic period, then she found out the monster that he is, killing humans, which is taboo for them, and his ambitions to try to become a godlike figure, and this led to her, because of the betrayal, falling out of love with him. But as much as she can't forgive him, she also can't forgive herself because she wasn't able to stop him because she was so blinded by the hope that he gave her of a brighter future that she didn't see what a monster he was until it was too late. He'd already become it. Um, and that's kind of how that goes. So that's 3 points, and that is all of the points I felt for this episode, making this a 3 out of 10. And that brings the mostly objective ranking list to: in first, Creeping Terror, the second victim. The moment of collision, an evil hand draws near to the Quincy. Gathering at the place of fortune, the man who makes his move. New school term, Renji has come to the human world. Bount, the ones who hunt souls. True identity of the devil, the secret which is revealed. Seventh is Death Game, the missing classmate. Rukia's return, revival of the substitute team. Breakthrough, the trap hidden in the labyrinth. Water attack, escape from the shutdown hospital. And then this episode is currently last place, Memories of an Eternally Living Clan. And that now brings us to my personal ranking for this episode, and I decided to give it a 2. Nothing in it actively offended me, however, it was boring. And the only thing of interest really was the whole Kenpachi thing, because we got to see like a flashback to him becoming the squad captain, and he is one of my favorites, which is why I gave it 2 points instead of 1. But ultimately, it was kind of a lot of talking and mostly Yoshino sitting around with Ishida, and even the flashbacks weren't really full of action. It was more like her standing places, watching people age, watching buildings crumble. Even like the romance was mostly them standing on a cliff briefly to imply that they fell in love. Like, it wasn't like in some other anime where you're actually shown like the entire story. Is if it was like a lot of times, for example, if we go to another show on this channel, One Piece, when they're showing a character's flashbacks, it's not just still a series of still images or barely moving anything, like barely anything happening images. It's usually like they're telling the whole story start to finish, and they dedicate like a couple episodes to it. But you get like dialogue, you get character interactions, and actual events taking place, which is kind of missing from these flashbacks, which again kind of makes it a little bit more boring, kind of like narrating a picture book rather than actually being able to experience a story. And again, I don't know what it is about the Bound arc, but it just doesn't speak to me. I don't necessarily enjoy it as much as I have other arcs or will other arcs that I know are coming up. And I don't find the story overly compelling. I don't really find the characters that compelling. And as a result of that, the flashbacks to flesh out these characters are less compelling. The reason Ichinose Maki or Maki Ichinose was interesting is because of the connection to existing characters like Kenpachi and Squad 11. But yeah, I thought I could only give it a 2. And so that brings the list to In first, Gathering at the Place of Fortune, The Man Who Makes His Move, Bount, The Ones Who Hunt Souls, Creeping Terror, The Second Victim, New School Term, Renji Has Come to the Human World, True Identity of the Devil, The Secret Which is Revealed. Sixth is Breakthrough, The Trap Hidden in the Labyrinth. Then we have Death Game, The Missing Classmate, Water Attack, Escape from the Shutdown Hospital, Rukia's Return, Revival of the Substitute Team, The Moment of Collision, An Evil Hand Draws Near to the Quincy, and then this episode is in 11th, Memories of an Eternally Living Clan. And that brings us to the final segment, series ranking so far. Both lists so far have Soul Society the Rescue arc in first, Agent of the Shinigami arc in second, and Soul Society the Sneak Entry arc in third. The Bount arc on the Mostly Objective is at 84 out of 280, and the personal side is at 68 out of 280. But with that, we've now rewatched and ranked Bleach, The Bount Arc, Episode 74, Memories of an Eternally Living Clan. Like and subscribe if you'd like to, and I'll see you in the next episode.